My fear with AI is that in our attempt to just get data, and make sense of it, we're going to miss the relational piece of what happens when you go to somebody and say, tell me, give it to me, even if I can decipher it myself. I'm sure we can get a lot by just going through Slack and going through emails and going through calendars and looking who's connected to who. But what I've learned in my work is it's much about the process and the conversation and the trust building, but also being able to go back and say, we heard you and here's what you can expect next, and then do it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Frontline Advantage. We have Craig Foreman on today. Craig and I actually met not too long ago when one of our friends, Dan Riley, was in town. And Craig, AJ, and Dan put on a wonderful event around community building in San Francisco with some very, very exciting leaders. I thought it was one of the best events I've been to this calendar year. It was really around just making people feel warm and comfortable and having an opportunity in a very casual setting to talk about different topics around AI, humanity, the future of tech, what the world is going to look like. And he can tell us a lot more. Craig also has a pretty established background and is doing some interesting work around Culture C that he'll be able to tell us. So, Craig, welcome.
Hey, Vivek, good to be here. I really appreciate you inviting me. I'm honored to be here and glad to be here.
Well, thanks for coming on. Why don't we talk a little bit about Culture C and sort of a little bit of your background? Because I know you've done some really interesting things across different organizations that sort of has led you to this journey.
Yeah, a little bit of background. Always have been fascinated by people, curious about people. There's a lot more to that. Just me growing up and in my journey, but joined the Air Force to pay for college. So I think that was an interesting experience to talk from a culture perspective and spending time in the military. And that brought me first time to California Bay Area. And eventually after my undergraduate degree in business, I moved back in 2003. So that's when I moved to the Bay Area. And eventually I was in education for quite some time, but I went back to grad school, got my degree in organizational psychology. And that was a real passion of mine. And the timing, I wrapped that up in like 2011 and, tech was popping back, in the Bay Area. So I kind of rose up through HR technology. So I worked at companies like Achievers doing recognition focused and LinkedIn, focused on talent. And then I landed at a company called Culture Amp in 2017 and pretty important in my journey and how it all ties together. And that was for the first time, instead of working on point solutions, like recognition rewards or how do you source talent, it was helping organizations. How do you evaluate culture in general? And it was a tool that was helping organizations run their own employee engagement surveys and make sense of that. And that was amazing because for the first time, I was finally working with organizations, leadership teams, helping them run good listening programs. How do you take that information and decipher it and then turn it into action? And to me, it was the most poignant thing that could be used in an organization in transformation of all this work of culture. Is what dawned on me was how little organizations are starting off from a good place of understanding or knowing what they're addressing. They're just whack-a-mole. And I love that work. I was there 6 years as lead people scientist at Culture Amp. And in May of 2023, I went on my own, started Culture C Consulting, basically to do more of that. I felt that at a tech company, it was incredible work, but there was more being left on the table as far as these companies were buying these tools, but not using them that well and not getting the most out of them. And that's performance management and employee engagement. So I started Culture C to do just that. And that's what we do now. So we help organizations that have made those investments into HR technology, yet have limited teams or need more support to run them well and get the most out of them. And I love that work. I love getting to support organizations with those insights and help them think through, find their own solutions. Because in the end of the day, the information's there, and it's just how do you uncover it, help these leaders get more data and information around how to build a great culture where people feel great and organizations thrive. So that's my background story.
Love it. Don McPherson, who is one of the co-founders with Dan at Modern Survey, talked about a lot of companies think that doing the survey is the work. Like they're like this idea of like, I'm just going to go take a survey. I'm going to get all this data and then maybe we'll get some action plans. And then it sits on someone's desk. It sounds like what you have with Culture C is the actual, let's go execute. Let's put the boots on the ground and not just have this data, but actually go do something about this data and look at the measurements, the outcomes, see how these changes actually are going to result in positive business outcomes. And that when we take these questions again, we're going to see a real improvement. Are we reading that the right way?
I think you are. And you'll even notice with me, well, you might not notice this, but I'm careful with how much I use the word survey, because I think a lot about employee listening programs. Now, and surveys are very important, but I see it as that is a mechanism of it's 3 stages: collect, understand, and act. The survey is part of the collect, right? So I'm really careful, because I think some things go in and out of like what's cool, what's the right thing to say. And I think surveys sound a little bit old school, and I get it.
Great.
But I also feel like we cannot dismiss the power of running a good sample set of data, making sure the questions are good. How are we delivering it? How are we getting answers? Do people feel safe? Is it valid? Is it reliable? But that's just phase one. Next is, how do we make sense of this data? Do we have the right information? How do we look at it? How do we think about it? And then finally, how do we contextualize it and turn it into measurable action? Meaning, because of X, Y, and Z, we're going to do this because we believe it will move the needle here. Let's do that. And then, to your point, repeat. So collect again, meaning run that same set of data again, so you can go apples to apples and say, we set out to achieve, a move around, our leadership communication. This is how we did it. Did it work? So I see it as a very important piece of that puzzle. We have to collect information to do this well. But I think that people get hung up on it's just a data collection initiative. And I think that's where we miss a lot of the other pieces of building trust with your employees. Use these as an opportunity to engage in a conversation, which means we heard you. Here's our response. So I think we have to be really careful, but I get it. But I don't just talk about a survey. A survey is a piece of a process.
Do clients often associate you with the implementation piece of the listening process? So let's take a scenario. I'm a company out there. I've got surveys like Qualtrics, Medallia, Question Pro, Perceptix, Microsoft Viva Glint, Quantum, Culture Amp, and I run my employee listening. Where do you all fit in on that? And I know you're describing, but tell me when do I call you, or when do you come knocking on my door that says, okay, you're going to help me with the leadership communication I'm not scoring as well on?
Companies will come to us when they're just getting started in that journey. But the other flip of that is, we see it in 2 halves. One is like setting up, implementing, and running these programs. The other half is the analysis and act phase. So surveys closed. We'd like somebody else to come in here, get their eyes on it, make a sense of it, come tell us what they're seeing. With certain tools, even within weeks after closing the survey, we can be delivering results to executives in a way that's making sense. So it's the speed too, which is important. That if you wait 3 or 4 months to turn around and present these results back to your organization, you've missed kind of a window, and people even if it's good data, they might not trust it because it's old, it's stale. My manager already left. So helping them get through that fast, so they can build that trust with their people and say, we heard you, here's what we heard, and here's what you can expect. So I'm often coming in helping the organization decipher that, make sense of it. And then we often work with the senior leaders to help them understand the sentiment and what's going on, on their teams, and what sense can we make of that quickly. So those are the 2 halves. And then we also work with organizations around performance management and helping them set up and run their performance management programs.
Interesting. And when you think back to your role, lead product scientist, at Culture Amp,
People scientist,
thank you. And then also now what you're doing in this era of AI, do clients ask you, how does AI fit into all of this? Or is that sort of just a lot of noise in the market, and people are people and they need to go change human behavior? How do you sort of think about AI?
I think it's just like everybody should be thinking about AI right now, which is from a productivity and like just pure tactical perspective, meaning the monumental shift in how we think about and look at open-ended questions and responses, right? The work we were doing before and how robust it was, and now how quickly we can take a lot of comments and get a general summary. When they get to me, it's really about using AI to support the narrative and telling the story, make a sense of the more, like I said, the open-ended questions. When you have 500 open-ended questions, that's hard to deal with. We've used sentiment analysis. We still do. I think that's really helpful, but the AI can do a lot more of the summaries there. there are two types of data. One type of data is the data they can get anytime they want. I call it passive data. I can go to my HRIS, I can go to my applicant tracking system, I can go into my Salesforce. You're not asking anything of anybody. You're tapping kind of the information that's sitting there. When you go to somebody and you ask them for information, they give it to you. That's a special kind of data, right? And I call that active data. My fear with AI is that in our attempt to just get data, and make sense of it, we're going to miss the relational piece of what happens when you go to somebody and say, tell me, give it to me, even if I can decipher it myself. I'm sure we can get a lot by just going through Slack and going through emails and going through calendars and looking who's connected to who. But what I've learned in my work is it's much about the process and the conversation and the trust building, but also being able to go back and say, we heard you and here's what you can expect next, and then do it. I think those two need to play together. I see a world where we both use active and passive data to make the most, decipher things that we couldn't decipher before, support people at the individual level, which we couldn't simply do a year ago or 2 years ago, that we can, but not lose our way and lose the relationship that we can also build through listening.
I love that. Having attended Talreos and talked with a few folks in the people analytics world, there's an abundance of that passive data, like you're talking about, being able to go into those systems and view information. And then, of course, the traditional mechanism around listening on the active side. But you also bring up a really good point that just because you're asking for the data, especially willy-nilly, it doesn't actually mean you're going to be building trust and closing that loop. It's something we've actually learned as well in our journey. So we used to just allow the opportunity to ask questions on any given day in the week, in the month. And we've changed our framework to say, before we even come up with the question, what is the category and what is the outcome or the problem we're trying to solve for? Because when we ask that question, it has to tie back into that, both in the near term, as well as the kind of the 12 to 18 month period where we say, okay, we've asked these things. And the way we think about it, we think of it as underreporting. So on the active side, you can ask these questions and there's different channels, but if you're not getting that intelligence and that data, you have blind spots, you have these gaps. But the point you bring up really on trust building, I love that. And it's something we've thought about on the operational side. We call it fixed verification or operational trust, which is to say, once you actually ask, you remove this plausible deniability, but I think that's a cop-out in most cases. Those are organizations that generally tend to be behind. And you say, okay, we've got this meaningful data that can help us be proactive and get ahead of things. But to actually build trust isn't just to say we heard you. It's to demonstrate we heard you by initiating some action, which you might actually be able to really help them with, and then remeasuring that similar question or same question and seeing actual change in the data. And doing that continuously is actually what builds trust and demonstrates you're being heard, not just saying, oh, acknowledgement, we heard you, thanks for answering the question. So hugely important concept. And I don't think the market is still doing it that well, especially the trust building component and making people really feel like their opinions count in this process. I know it more in the industrial world, but do you still see that a big gap? Is that a big gap in general?
It's a huge gap. And it's two-sided too, because there's another thing I see. I see companies run surveys, get information, and try to do everything and probably do a lot of great stuff. And because they're trying to do too much, they have a hard time communicating back. If people don't perceive or understand it's being done, that's the one that gets me the most, that I watch them doing the good work. Yeah. And they're missing they're doing too much. So oftentimes I say to organizations, even if you have a couple things you're doing quietly, pick one or two things that you're coming out publicly to your organization with and tell them what they're going to expect next and manage that process, because the worst is when companies are doing a whole bunch of stuff and nobody knows and sentiment continues to drop. A couple of things too I wanted to say. You said a lot of great stuff there. I made a couple notes. One is you alluded to something that I talk about, and that is questions send signals. If you have a workforce that naturally does not have a lot of say over their schedule, and you ask, how do I feel about my, flexibility in my schedule? That can be a mistake. When you ask those questions, you can create situations and they're sending signals, and you can create situations that don't need to be had. So very thoughtful about what you're asking and how that's going to land for your workplace. And the other one, which I think ties back to that AI thing, survey as much as you can act. So when people ask me about what about pulse surveys or always on surveys, it's not about the survey. I think people want to make it about the survey. If you can respond to an always on feedback system, 911, let's say, right? That works. But I think a lot of organizations, this goes back to what our leaders want data. So always on. But I worked for a company for a long time that built a tool that had this always on, and we could always just kind of tap into how we were feeling, and you could watch your team versus other teams. And it felt really good. And then there was an acquisition, and we watched our scores drop across our team, and no one said anything. And I lost complete faith in the tool. And I thought, this is the whole point, that it's here if there's in case there's a problem and we're not hearing anything. So this goes back to what we're talking about, of that under the surface level of collecting data, is you're doing yourself a disservice by leaving it always on if you can't respond in that way. Look, this is where AI excites me, because I think for the first time, we have the tools to help organizations manage that level of data at that speed, if we're doing it thoughtfully. So survey as much as you can act. People give you as much information, as you want, if they feel that their contribution is giving them something in return that's beneficial for them.
Yeah, and we very much see AI as a co-pilot as well. It's something to differentiate the signal from the noise,
Yeah,
to help you identify anomalies in the data, really to kind of take some of that arduous work of a human reviewing every comment and allowing a human to focus on the critical things and work in parallel with you to demonstrate success. You use the word story as well. Tell us a story or two about a before and after, since you've started Culture C and what it was before, a transformation or a situation, action, and resolution that might connect to the audience in some way.
Yeah, I love it. It was one of my first projects. I remember it started when I was still at Culture Amp, and then that was what kind of launched me off. I had an executive coach come to me who was a CEO. He was new to the organization, but he's a seasoned CEO. Had said, as I take this over, I want to do a culture transformation, and part of that is I want to have all of my executives get coaching over the course of the year, and I also want somebody to help us lead 7 executive offsites in 2023. She reached out to me and said, look, I'm comfortable with some of this. This is what I do, but I don't do the large group stuff. And there's a culture transformation element. So I got involved, and there was one stipulation I had, which was that, we'll do the 7 offsites, but also they were kind of doing old school. They were using Google to run their surveys. And I said, if you're serious about a culture transformation, it starts with getting good data. And this is just doesn't cutting it. So we have to roll in a tool. In this case, it was Culture Amp. So they brought in Culture Amp. And what we did was we launched and we ran a survey at the beginning of the engagement. We we used that data to drive and inform the executive team's decision making and how they were thinking, particularly when it came to the culture. And then at the end of the engagement, we ran it again. We were reviewing the data after it came back, and we organized it. I showed it by location. And one of the offices was across the board, like 20 points off, particularly around engagement and also intent to stay. I see myself here in 2 years' time. And the CEO looked at it right there, and he said, I knew it. I knew that office had problems. I need to get there. And number one, I think that's really powerful, because this idea that you're going to do this and it's going to be some magical thing, like, believe me, lots of insights come that way. But oftentimes, it's not that you don't know it. It's when you know 100 things and you're trying to figure out what makes most sense. A couple of weeks later, he went down, made the decision to go down and spend time at that office. He went back one more time in between before we ran the survey again. And we ran the survey again. And from everything I could see, that was probably the biggest intervention, was him going down and spending time. Mm-hmm. And we saw an 8-point lift in engagement there. And we saw like a 6-point lift in intent to stay, which is turnover, Yeah. I fundamentally think all he needed was something to validate his sense when he was sensing lots of things to make it important enough. And he went down there and we saw that. So that's why I love this work, because I didn't have to go in there and create a program they never thought about. I had to show the CEO a piece of data that helped him understand, I need to go spend time here. He went and spent time there. And just that attention drove change. And I just think about how many organizations don't even have that level of insight.
You're absolutely right. And it's a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that. This idea of, we often hear, when you hear culture, it's like when you talk about a balance sheet or an income statement, it's so easy to quantify everything on there, and people just love those kinds of numbers. When you introduce data that's from humans, and I don't know if you ever deal with this, and if you do, I'd love to hear about how you respond to it. But this idea that, those are just subjective quantitative metrics. People are telling me things about how they're feeling that day or what they think I want to hear. Do you just sort of say those organizations are not ready to actually make the positive change, or do you actually try to educate them out of curiosity? Because we had that happen to us a few times, and probably the learning for us is it's probably not worth our time dealing with people who don't value getting the data. We were talking about it earlier, the plausible deniability. Like, if I don't even ask, then I don't even know what to work on. And there's just so many organizations like that behind, or do you see a path for them to become educated?
Well, I think, okay, first there's some self-selecting. I think the company that's not ready or on the path, if they have those feelings, they probably never find themselves to me, because they usually find themselves to me after they've somehow gone over some hurdle to say, we're going to invest in this, right? So, by the time they get to me, but then let's pull back. Then I show up to an entire executive team. It's, of course I see all that stuff. I think there's a couple of things. I always try to meet them where they are. I also try, I tell the story of, years ago, we live close to the ocean, and so sometimes the weather can be a little more damp. We moved to bed and we noticed there was some mold on the wall, and pretty disconcerting. And then my wife said, we need to call somebody out. And my first reaction was like, they're going to come out. And at the time we were tight on money, where they're going to come out, they're going to open that wall. We're going to find out there's problems inside the wall. This is going to turn to, now we went, of course we called somebody out, we took care of it. But I always think about that we all have a little bit in us that we don't want to face the hard stuff sometimes. We don't want to cause a problem. I get that. So I'm always evaluating what I'm dealing with. Number one, I think I try to have some empathy that none of us, everybody wants to do something noble, but nobody wants to be scrutinized along the way. It's hard and it's scary. So I think part of my job in the beginning is usher them through it. Cause I know once we do it, it's not as scary as it feels, especially when it's done well. The questions are written the right way, where they're written in a way that's not pointed, but really to uncover and understand things. I think that I've worked with a lot of pharmaceuticals and, biotech, where you have scientific brains. And the first thing they want to do is just they're going to poke holes and try to understand. And that's just how they're structured. Like, I need you to build credibility before I buy your data. So I think there's always a level of being able to talk about how you collected it, how you went about this, what's the methodology, just the kind of the why to help. I also, when people say, well, it's just how people feel, 100%. When we do these surveys, they are sentiment. These are sentiment surveys. If everybody feels that the leadership doesn't communicate well, does it matter if you really do or don't? Like, do you want to know that's the sentiment, that's somewhere to go focus, because it's also a high driver of engagement. It's just like if you got your full blood workup every 6 months and do that for 5 years, think how good of a position you're going to be in with your physician around your health, because you have all this data to track and you can see if something deviates. And then you know what? You might run it and say it deviated. We just did layoffs. Okay. Not surprising that we saw a dip in our engagement. And then you run it again in 6 months and you start to watch that come back up. So I think it's how do you kind of frame this for people to understand? Number one, overcoming just the mind that needs to validate, and like you just have to give them the kind of the validity behind it. And then number two, I think framing it as the gift is the snapshot. Yeah, you took it in a moment in time, and that was the moment in time. But you know how difficult it is to get 1,000 people in 2 weeks to give you at least some sentiment about what's going on. And when you can get that much information, any one person, just because a few people may have clicked all the way down neutral, sure, it could happen. That gets offset with the data set that you have 80% of your people took it. So we can get a really strong signal. And that's what we're looking for. So when I hear people say that, I try to get to the other side of saying, as opposed to what? Having no signals, or having a pretty reliable, valid signal, and doing that periodically to help at least you course correct, versus flying blind, or you're in the cockpit of a ship without solid navigation system. Like, wouldn't you rather have the navigation system where 80% of the time it's accurate and you can steer around storms? So I think it's just helping them through that. But I also hold some empathy that people have those natural apprehensions. And that's part of my job, is to help explain and overcome that.
Yeah, it's really well said. The example too with the wall and the mold. What else are we going to uncover in here? And that's very much how humans operate and think. Yeah. We had the event, talked about the future. So I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts. 5, 10, 20 years from now, what does the world look like with how we interact and deal with people in our organizations, how we listen to them, and what role Culture C will be playing in the future?
Well, first I'll say, as much as anybody, I watch and I'm curious and I'm blown away, and I can't even begin to say that I know what 5 to 10 years looks like. I have some hunches and some things that I think I see now. I think number one, we are going to go through I'm not going to say probably, we're going to go through the biggest transformation in our work. And we're already seeing it, right? I was just talking to somebody earlier about, just how our values and where they are. I think that we had such a high value on analytical work for so long that that's going to be a shift that's going to be hard for us to grapple with, especially when so many people tooled themselves that way, where some of these, paralegals, computer programming, are going to shift for sure. I think we're going to move into an era of a creativity. I think the way we think, the way we prompt, the way we interact with AI, it's going to be more about how do you connect dots and how do you bring things together and leverage this versus can you crunch this data set? Can you do a model on these financials? So I think we all need to be thinking about what's the unique creative thing about what we do. And I don't care, even if you are an accountant, is there a part of how you work with your clients, how you do work and bring it together, that makes you unique? And even at the event, I said something that night that I think a lot about. I pointed at the audience at one point and said, AI will never replace this.
Yes.
And
remember that. Yeah.
Right. And it hit me at the moment, but the truth is AI is going to do a lot, but it's not going to replace relationships. And how are we relating to one another? What are the points of work where it takes multiple humans together, even if everybody's got AI in front of them? So I think we're going to see a little bit of a coming back towards relationships and the value of managing that. And you said, as far as culture C goes, look, as long as there are people in organizations, I do believe we're going to see smaller organizations and maybe more of them. And I also think we're going to see a lot of jobs that we don't have today. So I think over time, even through the disruption, we'll come out with something different. But as long as we are getting groups of people together to get aligned around a common objective or goal and to carry that out, for me, once anything over 100 people, that there's going to be work. So I don't get too hung up. I don't care if it's not 50,000 people. I expect we're going to have smaller organizations, but I also think they're going to be way more distributed organizations, and they're going to be this idea. You're never going to have people really in one location, in many of our types of work. I also fundamentally believe when people work well together, productivity goes up. So I think there's a world where we can enhance people's experience at work and what they get out of work. At the same time, they're bringing more to the table and organizations are being more efficient and doing less with more. So I think the need to be able to listen at scale and respond quickly is only going to go up. And I think AI is going to play a major role in that. We're going to see all kinds of things, but just like, the internet and other things, it'll be a monumental shift. But as long as people are involved, that's where I'll be there.
Love it. I fully agree. The idea of this monumental shift, whether it's like the internet, the industrial revolution, electricity, there's always this fear, what we were all doing before versus what we're going to be doing.
We always know it's always tangible what we could lose. It's very hard to make tangible what we could gain. So it's a natural fear that the first thing we worry about is what we're losing. But every time in my life when I've lost something or it's gone away, looking back, I'm always amazed at, what came next that I never could have imagined.
Yeah. And hopefully in some ways it also prioritizes people actually spending time with other humans, the community.
I really hope maybe I'm biased and wishful thinking, but when we did that event, there's moments where I kind of have a flashback to COVID and what we lost. And when we were there the other night, there was a moment, like I really meant that. Like I said a year ago, and I'll still say it, I believe people are going to pay to see live music in 20 years. Right. Yeah. The messiness of it, the uncertainty, even if robots and computers can play the music, I want to see humans do it. And I think we're going to build a new value as time goes on those sorts of interactions, that people will go out of their way to start to appreciate and savor good human connection and make it meaningful and worthwhile. And I think that should translate to our workplaces.
Love that. Fully agree. Live sports, live entertainment, humanity. Even Craig, you and I were talking about wanting to continue that. I hope you all continue what was started that night, whether it's, we talked about these dinners or these events like that. Again, it's just
it'll continue. These things come to life, and I see it from my perspective that I've been at this sort on the side. It's always been there, and now it's coming back to life via my new work at Culture C. So I have no doubt. I don't know when and how, but it seems to keep popping up, and it's something I really love to do. So. So I continue to play my role in helping bringing people together and running great events, and I love it. And when I can help me grow my business at the same time, I think it's awesome.
Well, fantastic. I want to thank you for coming on, Craig. Really appreciate it. I'll give you just a last moment here. Anything else you want to share with the audience or say about what you do or what you think?
All I would share is two things. One, if you're interested in me or you want to get in touch, always find me on LinkedIn. You can Culture Craig on LinkedIn. And also, if you're interested in the work that we do, www.culturec.com. And that's just, culture with a C at the end.com. You can learn more about the work that we do, how we help organizations. And you can also get in touch with us there if you're looking to have a conversation around that. So those are the big ones.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on, Craig.
Thank you.